Shalom Aleichem, Assalamu Alaikum. This is yet another response to the Kosher Jesus debate, and is therefore part of the Who is the Kosher Jesus series. This is a quick note to let the listener know that I've worked around the clock to produce a response, not from scratch, from years of notes as a religious studies major, particularly during my undergraduate years, where I focused on the historical Jesus. This was one of my main focuses. I focused on the historical Jesus and how historical critical methodologies are used to determine probabilities about the historical Jesus, who he was and who he was not. And I also focused on some of the Andalusian Judeo-Sufi works. These were my two big focuses, my primary focuses as an undergraduate. You'll notice I'm not looking directly at the camera for the most part because I am driving, so you'll have to excuse me for that. In any event, a lot of notes and short essays and things like that have been compiled that I've never published before. I've compiled them and redacted them and added new commentary in with them and made them a cohesive single work on the issue of the historical Jesus and the notion of the kosher Jesus, but specifically responding to Rabbi Boteach's endeavor to determine a probable kosher Jesus from Christian material. That is, from treif material determining a kosher Jesus. So from authors who composed a Jesus who would be a literary treif Jesus, a Jesus Christ, quote unquote, can we determine with any degree of probability a historical kosher Jesus? The answer is, of course, yes. And I say of course because hundreds of years of scholarship have gone into not simply coming to this conclusion, but agreeing on the rules of methodology by which this conclusion can be reached. So even though scholars of the historical Jesus don't all agree on the same things, they do more or less agree on the terms of the debate and the rules, the methodology. And these rules are simply unknown to Rabbi Boteach's critics. To what extent these rules are known to Rabbi Boteach, he doesn't mention them. He doesn't mention the scholarly methodologies in his Kosher Jesus work. This could be because he's not particularly aware of them. He does rely somewhat heavily on Chaim Jacobi, who is definitely not the best example of this methodology, but nonetheless comes to some similar conclusions in many ways, and engages in applying some of these criteria of determining probable historicity, whether he is aware of what those delineated criteria are or not. So in the same way, Rabbi Boteach has a good feel for how to do this assessment of determining probability, but he doesn't really seem to know the rules, the scholarly rules for determining probable historicity. If he did, I think he would have outdone himself in his book. As a result, I've responded to what I perceive as shortcomings in his book, namely the lack of this methodology, this historical critical methodology. But I also respond to his critics, in particular Tovia Singer, the radio talk show host, who debated with him. I only saw part of it. By the time I even got to 1 minute and 35 seconds, it had become a shouting match, and Tovia Singer was announcing that it is impossible. He was saying this authoritatively. As others, Rabbi Asher Meza, who I've written a note responding to his YouTube video in which we debated, and as it stands, I don't think he's continuing on with that debate, unless by this time he chooses to. I would urge him not to, because it's a losing battle, not because I'm smart and he's stupid or anything like that. He seems like a very nice and smart guy. But because this is a defined issue of scholarship, of historiographical research, and how we approach things as a historian. This is not subjective, as he or Tovia would argue. It's not, as Tovia said, picking and choosing what you want to believe out of these accounts. That's not what's going on at all. So the question, and I answered it on my phone. The question, as it was posed to me on the photo that I tagged Rabbi Asher in on my Facebook, the photo for the cover of this book that I've written in response called "Who is the Kosher Jesus?" The question that he posed to me is, basically a restatement of Tovia's, is how do you get a kosher Jesus out of this material that's only written by Christians? Our material on Jesus coming from these 4 canonical gospel accounts, or other ones. So, in fact, there are heretical texts as well. But and there are places we can go with even that premise, that all of our sources on the historical Jesus are purely Christian. But I'll accept that. I'll say, okay, let's say that all of our sources on the historical Jesus are written by Christians. Something which we can't really say. First of all, we're not certain that the Markan account, the earliest account, was written by a Christian whatsoever. There's quite a bit of Christian theology lacking from it. The Matthean Gospel was probably not written by a Christian. And in this book, I get into some of the unpacking of the Matthean account and how it almost seems to be bipolar in being Jewish and being anti-Jewish, and what that can tell us as historical critical researchers, how we can determine what's probably going on there. So these two were probably not Christians. So this premise is itself somewhat flawed. Luke and John, as I explained, do represent the typical source material for the theologically Christian, quote-unquote, Jesus Christ. But does that mean that they, or even all 4, if we're to presume that all 4 are written by Christians, are devoid of historical material, and that if they do contain historical material, that we are just simply clueless as to how to extrapolate that historical material and determine its probability? No. That's not the job of rabbis. Now, Rabbi Boteach has ventured off into a new field of research, and that's good. It's not the job of most radio talk show hosts to engage in this sort of work as a historian. I don't expect them to. I don't expect these guys or these critics to be aware of what these methodologies are. And in fact, most of them have never even read Rabbi Boteach's book. So now, when it comes to me discussing or debating with them, we're dealing with a compounded problem. One, they, in most cases, have not read the Kosher Jesus book, Rabbi Boteach's book. And two, they haven't read my fairly inexpensive book that I'm simply selling in PDF format. If you PayPal $9.99 to mikhaah@gmail.com, or if you look on Amazon Kindle, just on the Amazon store, or on the NOOK store within this week. So almost certainly by the time you're watching this. Let's say by the end of the first week in March 2012, you'll find this on sale there for $9.99. It's very, very cheap. I mean, you can't do anything for $9.99. Give you a couple gallons of gas at these prices. So I've painstakingly put all this research together. For $9.99, you can spend, if you're diligent, you could probably read it in a day. If you want to read it very critically, you could spend a couple of days. If you want to read it at a slow pace, who knows how long it'll take you. But they haven't read this book either. And this book, unlike Rabbi Boteach's, goes into the specifics of the historical criteria, the criteria that we use for determining probable historicity, probable authenticity of any statement attributed to Jesus, about Jesus, or supposedly by Jesus. It goes through the history of the quest for the historical Jesus, this historiographical work, this what we're calling historical Jesus research, third quest or post-quest, all the way back to Albert Schweitzer. It goes through all of this, and this is stuff that all of these critics don't know really anything about. So I would urge you, if you're a critic and you're willing to consider that you might be wrong, you should pick up this book. If you're not willing to consider that you're wrong, then you probably aren't going to pick up the book, just like you probably haven't picked up Rabbi Boteach's, because you're then going to find any reason to justify why Rabbi Boteach is wrong, why various scholars of historical Jesus research are wrong, why I'm wrong, and you're right. It must be that we're all secretly Christian missionaries, quote-unquote Messianic Jews or Jews for Jesus, so-called. It couldn't just be that we know something about this scholarly endeavor that you don't know and that you refuse to educate yourself on. It couldn't be that, right? Or if you consider that maybe it could be that, then check this out, because I really don't see you, if you're Jewish, I don't see you reading Rabbi Boteach's book and mine and learning the actual solid historical criteria for determining probable historicity or authenticity, specifically in the field of historical Jesus research. I don't see you reading that, learning this, and then walking away and saying, well, you know what, I really think that the Lucan and Johannite accounts really describe who the historical Jesus was, and this other layer of material in Matthew that is anti-Jewish in spite of the Jewish material in there. That's probably the real Jesus. And I also don't see you walking away with this almost intentionally defeatist attitude that, well, we just can't know anything about history. We can't figure. This was part of what was called the no-quest period. It was an intellectual fallacy. It was an era that's already come and gone. Those arguments already happened a century ago. We've already been there and done that in the scholarly world, in historical Jesus research. Your argument is not new. It's old, and it's been defeated already. Rabbi Boteach may not know that, but I do. And you may not know that, but I do. So debating it, well, we can debate it, but we're just rehashing a debate where you've already lost before you were born. It's already happened. If you want to learn then take this opportunity to learn. $10 to learn something you didn't know, and to learn, as Rabbi Boteach points out, about a lost hero of Judaism of 1st century CE, Second Temple era, Jewish Revolution, someone whose story was hijacked by Hellenistic Christians, by Paulians, and someone who deserves to have their true story told, the greatest story never told, to have that told.